Thank you, Sam. I'm very pleased to be here amongst my two dear friends, Mardier and Selim Jahan. And as you have seen, since this morning we are in philosophy, so I'm going to also use, I'm also going to dwell on it. This morning, Alan Clark said we need a new social contract. That's the basic message of this report. And when it was first used, that expression, social contract, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, it was 254 years ago. He never used the expression sustainable development. He didn't know what that was. But in fact, what we have been doing since, including the last installment, which is the definition of sustainable development as three pillars, economic, social, and environmental, is nothing else than revisiting Rousseau. We keep revisiting him because he was the one who proposed that we need a social balance through a social contract, and man relations with nature have to be balanced. And that's basically what this has been about. The journey has been quite long. Are we now in the cusp of really change? If you look into 2015 as the year that has produced so many new agreements, one may be tempted to say, yes, we have now defined the road less traveled, and we have now a very clear direction of what we need to do in the development agenda. And I wish it was true, because that will not necessitate our seminar to go for a few hours, and probably us still going to discuss this for many, many years to come. Because we'll just be satisfied that we know where we are going. But we don't. And reports like this are a contribution to reduce our anxiety, the expression I used this morning, but also to give us elements, insights, that will allow us to change a bit our course and take into account at least the part we know. And we already know quite a bit about the transformations taking place in the world. Let me start with the two general axioms that we use to define our roads. One that has been put together by the Human Development Report itself. Human development is about enlarging human choices and providing capabilities to fulfill those choices. That is not a meager contribution. It was the one that really put the emphasis on us going beyond just looking into the economics. And today there are a lot of people busy with beyond GDP, ways of interpreting national accounts. You were referring to it as well, Mar. The need for us to really take into account so many elements that are not being valued properly. And yet, when we started this discussion with Human Development Report is about enlarging human choices, there was a very skeptical view of whether this was going to take hold, and it took. The other axiom that we use a lot is these days is structural transformation. Structural transformation remains key in shifting towards high productivity jobs and ensuring maximization of capabilities. And of course, all the discussion about work enters into this axiom completely. So I think it would be useful for us to just look into a couple of global processes that may influence our discussion. One, globalization and the technological revolution are changing trade of intermediate goods, but also the way people work, the type of work, and human development itself. As countries get richer, normally they go from agriculture into manufacturing. And then later on from manufacturing, they go all the way to the knowledge-intensive processing of value. And this output contributes in a great deal to reduce employment as we know it. But it is important for us to understand exactly what this reduction of employment means. Because, for example, manufacturing in the UK is under 15%, and in Italy is just 15% of GDP. But the reason is mostly because part of the manufacturing has been exported. Some prefer the word delocalized to other parts of the world, in this case, Southeast Asia and China in particular. And as labor costs will go up and they get richer in those regions, they will delocalize again. And this time around, we believe it's coming our way. And it can come in different ways. It can come with the same characteristics that we observe right now in China, with huge pollution. So basically, the emissions now have transited from the richest to the less richer, and then we, by default, are always, very, very much ahead of the curve by default, because we emit the least. So we are the low carbon, region, but not because we are rich. And the same with industrialization. We are the least ingrained into technological platforms that are not clean because we don't have much manufacturing. So as it comes our way, we can do it differently. This time around, the technology is available. The potential for renewable energies is available. The intensity of the discussion about climate impact is very strong. So we have some things meditating in our favor, and as we look into the phenomena of work and employment, we can see differences in the way some define jobless growth and our own partly jobless growth. And why is it? Because theirs is because they are losing a certain number of structural characteristics that favor us. And ours is because we are not taking advantage of the same. So how are we going to change that? The report gives us a lot of interesting insights on how to tackle this. And I think it will be very good reading in that regard. But I was mentioning the issue of manufacturing trends because, if you look into labor-intensive tradables, like textiles, like clothes and toys and things like that, they represent only 7% of what is being transferred right now from industrialized to non-industrialized countries, where cheaper labor costs are one of the main reasons for this flow. Developing countries have about $342 billion trade deficit in labor-intensive tradables. So how are we going to overcome that? Is going to contribute to job creation a great deal. The blurring of manufacturing and services is also occurring. And knowledge accumulation and its application have become major drivers of sustainable economic development and are increasingly at the core of countries' competitive advantage in the economy, on the global economy. So a shift from low productivity jobs to higher productivity opportunities depends on technical and technological skills. And I think the report basically makes the case that if we don't do this through policy incentives that are going to balance what you get as a result, we can just accelerate the polarization and eventually inequality. And that's what we are going to discuss in the second panel. So let me just say a few things about the African context. I think Africa, because we account for about 2/3 of the global trade in intermediates, as we know, that are dominated in our case by mining products and resource-based manufacturing. We really have to display much bigger dynamism and greater diversification. And manufacturing represents really our great entry point. And I think we can do it in 3 basic tracks, the most exciting tracks. The first one is commodity-based industrialization. So we add more value to what we already export, but we should not be overambitious and think that we are going to go all the way up the value chain. But we can increase quite considerably our participation in the value chain. Second is agro-processing, because that will have the pull factor of increasing agricultural productivity, where it still resides a majority of our labor force, and also will be a magnet for transformation. And then the third is, absorbing this delocalization from others, because our labor costs are low and because we have a market that is growing so fast, and ours is going to be 2 billion people by 2050, and with a huge growth also of the middle class. So we are calling this basically structural transformation. This is what positioning of Africa should be about, and some of the policy considerations will include how we focus on our human capital, leveraging large opportunities. For instance, this issue of the informal sector is very interesting because, as I said, by default we are low carbon. By default also Africa is the region that gives most value to social work. But it's not because we are advanced. It's because we have not ingrained ourselves yet into the bad apples story, and we should, on that score, also leapfrog and do the right things, and that's what the report basically is offering us as an opportunity. I always like to give Africa the ambition that goes with being the latest to become the first in many areas where the opportunities arise. And what Mar was saying of Ethiopia, and we are in Ethiopia, so it's not a coincidence, I think, that you chose to launch the report here. If you can progress in 55% human development ahead of any other country in the world in terms of percentage growth, you can show that level of ambition. There is no other country in the world where 60% of its budget is for investment. And this is against every single precept, recommendation, policies that are out there from the likes of us, international organizations, me excluded. And so we have to be bold, and we have to be capable of defying conventional wisdom, because the results are there to prove that sometimes being bold pays off. Thank you.